stood on the command deck of his warship and looked down at the small blue planet below. 4 was not an important world. It had no valuable minerals and no strategic position. But the humans had built colony there, and the Empire wanted it gone. Had brought 50,000 soldiers to remove 3,000 human civilians and their tiny defense force. He expected the mission to last no more than 2 days. Second officer approached him with a day tablet. The scans showed only 200 human soldiers protecting the colony. Almost laughed. 200 against 50,000. The humans would surrender within hours of the first attack. Every species in the galaxy knew when a battle was lost before it began. Every species except it seemed the human. Nate Collins received the surrender demand at dawn. He read it twice and then put it aside. His lieutenant Maya Torres watched him carefully. She had served with Collins for 6 years and knew that look on his face. He was not going to surrender. She wanted to argue with him, but she also knew he was right. They did not take prisoners. Surrender meant death for everyone in the colony. Walked outside and looked at the defense walls his soldiers had built over the past week. They were strong but not strong enough. Nothing would be strong enough against 50,000 enemy troops, but Collins had made a promise to the families in the colony. He had promised to give them time to escape through the tunnels that led to the emergency bunkers in the mountain. Every hour he could hold the line meant more children reaching safety. First landing ships came down at noon. They expected to find the humans hiding in fear. Instead, they found soldiers standing ready at their positions. The aliens opened fire and the humans fired back. The battle for 4 had begun. The fighting from his command ship with growing confusion. The humans were not running. They were not begging for mercy. They stood and fought even though they had no chance of winning. He had studied human military history before the mission. He knew there were stubborn fighters, but this was beyond stubborn. This was madness. First day of fighting cost 300 soldiers. He had expected to lose none. The humans used every building and every wall for cover. They fell back slowly and made the pay for every meter of ground. But what confused most was what happened to his wounded soldiers. A leader named Kex was shot during the afternoon assault. He fell in the open ground between the 2 armies. His soldiers could not reach him without being killed. Kex waited to die alone. But then something strange happened. A human soldier ran out from cover and dragged Kex to safety, not to the human lines but to a neutral area where medics could reach him. The human took a bullet in the shoulder while doing this. He still completed his mission and then limped back to his own side. And an explanation from his intelligence officers. They had none. No species in the galaxy helped any wounded during battle. It made no sense. War was about killing your enemies, not saving them. Torres set up her metal station in the basement of an old warehouse. She had limited supplies and 2 men patient. Human soldiers kept arriving with wounds that needed treatment. But they also brought something else. They brought wounded soldiers. Collins had ordered his troops to capture enemies alive when possible and treat their injuries. Maya did not question the order. She simply did her job and saved every life she could. Since the humans had lost 40 soldiers, they had also saved 11 lives, received reports about this, and did not know what to make of them. His captured soldiers were being fed and given medical care. The humans were sharing their own limited food and medicine with the enemy. This violated every rule of warfare that understood. Gathered his officers that night for a brief meeting. They had bought 1 full day for the evacuation. 500 civilians had reached the mountain bunkers. That left 2,500 still in danger. Collins needed to hold the line for at least 3 more days. His officers looked exhausted, but none of them complained. They knew what was at stake. Second day began with a massive assault. Sent 10,000 soldiers against the human lines. He expected to break through within hours, but the humans had prepared surprises during the night. They had dug new trenches and set up new defensive positions. They fought like demons and held their ground. Dang Park led his squad through the worst of the fighting. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke more than necessary, but he was also the best soldier Collins had. When a position threatened to flank the human lines, Dang led a counterattack that drove them back. He captured 20 enemy soldiers in the process. Every single one of them was treated with respect and given water. But a human radio transmission that afternoon. He expected to hear panic or despair. Instead, he heard soldiers joking with each other and encouraging the wounded. One soldier was singing an old Earth song while he helped reload ammunition. These humans were facing certain death and they were singing. General called his senior officers to a meeting that night. He showed them footage from the battle. Human soldiers carrying wounded enemies to safety. Human medics treating injuries before their own. Human commanders refusing to fire on positions where wounded aliens might be hiding. His officers watched in silence. None of them could explain what they were seeing. Received a report that night from the evacuation teams. 800 more civilians had reached safety. The tunnels were working, but they were getting closer to discovering them. Collins needed a new plan to keep the enemy distracted. Torres finished her shift at midnight. She had saved 3 human lives and 4 lives that day. One of the soldiers had woken up and looked at her with confusion in his eyes. He asked her why she helped him. Maya told him the truth. She helped him because he was wounded and she was a doctor. That was all the reason she needed. Sleep that night, he kept watching the footage of human soldiers helping his wounded. He had conquered 12 worlds for the Empire. He had never seen anything like this. These humans were unlike any enemy he had ever faced. They fought like warriors, but they showed mercy like priests. He did not understand them, but he was beginning to respect them. Next morning brought fresh fighting and fresh questions. Was about to learn that everything he knew about war was wrong. Third day of the siege brought rain and heavy fog. Used the weather to his advantage and sent troops around the human flanks. He expected to catch them by surprise. Instead, his soldiers walked into clearly marked warning signs. The humans had placed bright flags around their minefields. They had warned the enemy about the dangers ahead. He reported this with disbelief in his voice. No army in galactic history had ever warned enemies about minefields. The whole point of mines was to kill soldiers who did not know they were there. But the humans had chosen to save lives rather than hate them. Ordered his troops to advance carefully around the marked areas. He lost no soldiers to mines that day. Lead Grant sat in her communicating bunker and monitored enemy transmission. She heard officers discussing their attack plan. She could have stayed silent and let them walk into ambushes. Instead, she broadcast warnings on open channel. She told which routes were dangerous and which buildings were rigged to collapse. Her commanding officer Dang Park asked her why she did this. Lee told him that killing enemies who did not know they were in danger was not warfare. It was murder. He heard about Lee's broadcast and did not punch her. He understood her reasoning. The humans were fighting to protect their people, not to slaughter aliens. Every life they saved was a message to the enemy. Humans were different. Humans had rules, and those rules mattered even when facing certain death. For a pause in the fighting at midday, he sent a messenger to the human lines with a simple question. Why were they doing this? Why did they warn enemies and save wounded and treat prisoners with kindness? The messenger returned with a single word answer: honor. Earl did not understand the word in the context of warfare. He searched his database for human military concepts and found something called the Geneva Convention. These were rules that humans had created centuries ago to limit the cruelty of war. They protected prisoners and wounded and civilians. They banned certain weapons and certain tactics. Read through these rules with growing amazement. Humans had fought terrible wars against each other. They had killed millions of their own kind. They had also created laws to make war less brutal. No other species in the galaxy had done this. A lieutenant named Save was captured during an afternoon patrol. He expected torture and execution. Instead, the humans gave him food and water and medical treatment for a wound on his leg. A human soldier named Chris Vega sat with him and tried to communicate using a translation device. Chris asked Save about his family and his. He treated Save like a person rather than a prisoner. It was released the next morning with a message for General. The message said that all prisoners would be returned unharmed once the fighting ended. Collins wanted to know that captured soldiers were safe. He wanted to remove the fear that made armies fight to the last soldier rather than surrender. The message felt something he had not felt in decades of warfare. He felt doubt. He had always believed that mercy was weakness. He had always believed that total destruction of enemies was the only path to victory. But these humans challenged everything he thought he knew. They showed mercy and they were not weak. They followed rules and they were not losing faster because of them. Torres worked through another long night in her medical station. A soldier with severe burns was brought in by human troops who had pulled him from a cracked landing ship. Mai spent 4 hours saving his life. When he woke up, he asked her the same question that all the alien patients asked. Why did she help him? Mai gave the same answer she always gave. Because helping was right and letting him die would have been wrong. Day brought the heaviest fighting yet. Through 20,000 soldiers at the human lines. He needed to end the siege before his superiors started asking questions. The humans held their ground for 6 brutal hours before falling back to their secondary position. They lost 60 soldiers that day, but they also evacuated another 700 civilians through the tunnel. Watched his exhausted troops dig new trenches that night. They had been fighting for 4 days without rest. They were running low on ammunition and medicine, but none of them talked about surrender. They talked about the children they had saved and the families that had reached the mountains. They talked about holding the line for just one more day. Dane Park found Collins sitting alone near the command post. The captain was looking at a photograph of a young boy. Danny asked who the boy was. Collins told him it was his nephew who lived in the colony. The boy had reached the bunkers on the first day. Everything Collins had done since then was to make sure that sacrifice meant something. Reports that night about morale among his troops. It was falling. Soldiers who had fought the humans were asking questions that soldiers had never asked before. They wanted to know why they were killing people who showed them mercy. They wanted to know why humans helped wounded enemies while left their own wounded to die. Some soldiers had secretly kept the food and water that human prisoners had given them. They said it tasted like shame. Earl did not sleep that night. He studied human history until dawn. He read about their wars and their peace treaties. He read about their hospitals and their refugee camps. He read about soldiers who had given their lives to save enemies from burning vehicles and drowning ships. These stories were not propaganda. They were documented facts that spanned centuries of human civilization. Brought new orders from the High Council. Admiral had grown impatient with the slow progress of the siege. She commanded to end the human resistance within 2 days using any means necessary. The order included authorization for chemical weapons. Read this order 3 times. Then he put it aside and said nothing to his officers. This had shown him something he could not forget. They had shown him that warriors could fight with honor. They had shown him that rules could make soldiers stronger rather than weaker. And now his own empire was asking him to break every rule the humans held sacred. He received word that 1,200 civilians remained in the colony. They needed 2 more days to complete the evacuation. He did not know if his soldiers could last that long, but he knew they would try, because trying was what humans did. The 5th day of the siege began with a breach in the outer wall. Soldiers poured through the gap and pushed into the colony streets. Collins ordered his troops to fall back to the inner defensive ring. They were running out of space to retreat. They were running out of time. Chris Vega was caught in the open when the wall fell. He took cover behind a destroyed vehicle and prepared to die. A squad of soldiers advanced toward his position, but something strange happened. The aliens stopped firing when they saw he was alone and wounded. One of them was Save, the lieutenant who had been captured and released 2 days earlier. Save ordered his soldiers to let Chris withdraw. He said the human had shown him mercy and he would do the same. This instant on his tactical display. One of his lieutenants was letting any soldier escape. He should have been furious. Instead, he felt something like pride. His soldiers were learning from the humans. They were becoming something better than what the Empire had made them. Cole worked beside my tours in the overcrowded medical station. They had moved to a smaller building closer to the evacuation tunnels. Wounded soldiers kept arriving faster than they could be treated, and not slept in 3 days. Her hands shook from exhaustion, but she kept working. A young human soldier died on her table that afternoon. She cried for exactly 1 minute. Then she wiped her eyes and saved the next patient. Deeper into the colony through the afternoon, they captured 2 buildings that overlooked the human position. Collins knew they would use those buildings to rain fire down on his troops. He had 2 choices. He could destroy the buildings with explosives and kill everyone inside, or he could assault them directly and lose many soldiers. He chose the assault because his scouts reported wounded in the building. Killing wounded enemies was not something he would do. Park led the assault on the first building. His squad fought room by room and floor by floor. They lost 8 soldiers taking the building, but they captured 30 troops and found 12 wounded aliens who would have died in an explosion. Dan looked at those wounded enemies and felt no regret for the friends he had lost. He had done the right thing. That mattered more than survival. The assault on his display and saw something that broke his understanding of war completely. Human soldiers were shielding wounded with their own bodies during the fighting. They were taking bullets to protect enemies. One human soldier threw himself on top of a wounded when a grenade landed nearby. The human died, survived, turned off his display and sat in silence for a long time. Received a request from my tours that evening. She wanted to negotiate a ceasefire to exchange wounded. Both sides had prisoners who needed better medical care than field hospitals could provide. Collins agreed and sent the request to. He expected it to be rejected. No general had ever agreed to such terms. Did the ceasefire within the hour. He told his officers it was a tactical decision to recover valuable soldiers, but the truth was different. He wanted to see these humans up close. He wanted to understand what made them willing to die for enemies. Exchange happened at sunset in a cleared area between the lines. Human medics carried wounded on stretchers while medics carried human wounded. Collins supervised his side while commander supervised the other. The 2 officers did not speak, but they nodded to each other with something like respect. Down from his command ship to observe the exchange. He stood apart from the others and watched the humans work. They handled wounded with the same care they showed their own. They spoke softly and moved gently. One human soldier held the hand of a dying and stayed with him until the end. and conquered 12 worlds. He had never seen such compassion from NP. Ceasefire lasted 2 hours. During that time, Collins managed to evacuate another 300 civilians through the tunnels. Only 900 remained in the colony. They needed one more day. Just one more day and everyone would be safe. Fell and the fighting resumed. Pushed harder than before. They knew the humans were weakening. They could smell victory in the air, but they also fought differently now. Some squads began taking prisoners instead of killing wounded. Some began avoiding shots that might hit metal personnel. The infection of human honor was spreading through the alien ranks. Another message from Admiral that night. She demanded to know why the siege was taking so long. She reminded him of the chemical weapons authorization. She told him to end the embarrassment by mourning or face consequences. Read her message and felt anger rising in his chest. This admiral had never seen the humans fight. She had never watched them die for principle. She had no right to order their destruction with poison gas. Gathered his remaining officers for what might be their last meeting. They had 90 soldiers left. They had enough ammunition for maybe 6 hours of fighting. But they also had hope. The evacuation was almost complete. The civilians were almost safe. Everything they had fought for was within reach. Torres reported that her medical supplies were nearly gone. She had used the last of her painkillers on a soldier with burns covering half his body. The alien had thanked her in broken human words before losing consciousness. Mai did not know if he would survive, but she knew she had done everything possible to save him. 6th day would decide everything. Collins could feel it in his bones. They would make one final push to break the human lines. His soldiers would make one final stand to protect the people they loved. And somewhere above them all, General would have to choose what kind of warrior he wanted to be. He came slowly over the ruined colony. Collins stood on the front line with his troops. He told them he was proud of everything they had done. He told them that their families would remember their sacrifice forever. Then he raised his weapon and prepared to fight one last time. The sunrise from his command deck. He held the chemical weapons authorization in his hand. He thought about the humans who had saved his soldiers and warned his troops and treated his wounded with kindness. He thought about the rules they followed even when facing death, and he made his decision. Order for chemical weapons went into the disposal unit. Would not use them. He would not become the monster that Admiral wanted him to be, but he still had 50,000 soldiers ready to overwhelm the human defenders. The siege would end today one way or another. An assault came like a wave of steel and fire. 30,000 soldiers advanced on the final human position. Collins knew this was the end. His 90 soldiers could not hold against that number, but they could buy time. They could give the evacuation teams a few more precious hours. Park held the eastern flank with just 12 soldiers. They faced 5,000 enemies. Dane told his squad to make every shot count. He told them to fall back slowly and never stop fighting. He told them he was honored to serve beside them. Then they hit their position and the world became chaos. The assault from his command ship. His soldiers were winning. The human lines were crumbling. Victory was minutes away, but the general felt no satisfaction. He felt empty. These humans had taught him something about honor and he was repaying them with destruction. Sent a message to at mid-morning. The message offered a trade. Collins would surrender himself in exchange for safe passage for the remaining civilians. He would become a prisoner and face whatever punishment they wanted. He only asked that the families be allowed to leave in peace. The message reached like a punch to the chest. This human captain was offering his life for his people. He was not trying to escape or negotiate better terms. He was simply willing to die if it meant saving others. Had commanded armies for 40 years. He had never received such an offer from any enemy. Torres heard about the surrender offer and confronted Collins in the command post. She told him he could not sacrifice himself. She told him the soldiers needed their command. Collins looked at her with tired eyes and explained that his life meant nothing compared to 900 civilians. He had made his choice and he would not change it. Something he had never done in his career. He requested a meeting with the enemy commander under a white flag. He wanted to speak with Collins face to face. He wanted to understand what drove a man to offer his life for strangers. The request was transmitted to the human lines and accepted within minutes. Met in the ruins of a building that had once been a school. Collins came alone and unarmed. Came with 2 guards but ordered them to wait outside. The human captain and the general stood facing each other for the first time. Neither spoke for a long moment. The silent asking a simple question. Why? Why did the humans fight the way they did? Why did they save enemies and warn of dangers and treat prisoners with kindness? What possible advantage did such behavior provide? They answered slowly. He said humans had learned hard lessons from their own history. They had fought terrible wars against each other. They had committed horrible crimes in the name of victory. And they had discovered that cruelty destroyed the winners as much as the losers. Rules of war were not weakness. They were civilization. They were the difference between soldiers and monsters. So without interrupting, when Collins finished, the general asked another question. Did Collins hate them for attacking his colony? Did he want revenge for the soldiers he had lost? Shook his head. He said he felt no hatred. The soldiers were following orders just like his own troops. They had families waiting for them on distant worlds. They deserved to go home alive if possible. Collins said he had lost his brother in a war 10 years ago. He had spent years consumed by rage and desire for vengeance. But that anger had nearly destroyed him. He had learned to let it go. He had learned that mercy was stronger than him. Something shifted inside him as he listened. He had spent his whole life believing that strength came from ruthlessness. He had believed that mercy was a flaw that enemies would exploit. But this human captain had shown mercy to thousands of soldiers. And instead of exploiting that mercy, his own troops had begun to imitate it. The humans had infected his army with honor. General told Collins about the chemical weapons order. He told him that Admiral wanted to gas the entire colony and kill everyone inside. He told him that he had refused to follow that order. Collins thanked him quietly. He said refusing evil orders was the hardest thing a soldier could do. He said it showed more courage than any warrior on the battlefield. For an hour while the battle paused around them, learned about human families and human dreams. He learned about the children in the evacuation tunnels and the parents who had stayed behind to fight. He learned that these humans were not so different from his own people. They loved and feared and hoped just like. They were not monsters to be destroyed. They were people to be understood. Message arrived for as they talked. Admiral had sent a sand fleet of 4. She was coming personally to take command and finish what had failed to complete. The chemical weapons would be deployed within hours of her arrival. The colony and everyone in it would die. Received the news without visible reaction. He simply nodded and said he understood. His soldiers would continue fighting until the end. They would protect the civilians as long as possible. That was their duty and they would not abandon it. His sin in that moment. He could not let Admiral murder these people. He could not watch poison gas kill children who had done nothing wrong. The Empire had ordered him to commit an atrocity and he would refuse. He would refuse even if it cost him everything. General returned to his command ship and called his senior officers together. He told them what he planned to do. He told them he was going to defy Admiral and protect the human colony. He gave them the choice to follow him or report him as a traitor. Every single officer chose to follow. Watched from the ground as ship began changing position. They were not attacking the colony anymore. They were forming a defensive line between Four and the approaching fleet. The enemy general was protecting him. The enemy army was shielding his people. Collins felt tears forming in his eyes for the first time in days. Torres came to stand beside her captain. She asked what was happening. Collins told her he was not entirely sure, but he thought maybe the humans had won something bigger than a battle. They had won a heart. On his command deck and prepared to face Admiral, his fleet against hers, his honor against her orders. He did not know if he would survive the coming confrontation, but he knew he was doing the right thing. The humans had taught him that some things mattered more than victory. Some things mattered more than life itself. Will arrived with 40 warships and a fury that burned cold in her eyes. She had expected to find a conquered colony and a victorious general. Instead, she found her own fleet blocking her path and her own commander standing in defiance. She demanded an explanation on open channels so every ship could hear. 1. He broadcast his response to every vessel in both fleets and to the surf below. He told them what he had witnessed during the siege. He described humans who saved wounded enemies and warned of dangers and treated prisoners with kindness. He spoke of soldiers who died protecting aliens they had every reason to hate. He told the story of Captain Collins who offered his own life for the safety of strangers. And he asked a simple question. Are these the monsters the Empire had described, or are these the savages who deserved death by poison gas? Will cut off his transmission and ordered her ships to advance. She declared a traitor and commanded her captain to destroy his fleet, but something unexpected happened. Half of her captains refused to fire. They had heard the broadcast. They had questions of their own. The admiral screamed orders at ships that would not obey. Watched the confrontation from the ground with his remaining soldiers gathered around him. They had expected to die that morning. Now they watched their enemy fighting itself above their heads. Lee Grant picked up fragments of transmissions on her equipment. She translated them for the others. Soldiers on both fleets were demanding answers. They wanted to know if the stories about humans were true. They wanted to know why their empire had ordered the murder of children. His position between the colony and the admiral's fleet. His ships were outnumbered, but his crews were determined. They had seen the humans fight with honor for 7 days. They had felt shame at their own conduct. Now they had a chance to be something better. They would not waste it. And off lasted 3 hours. During that time, the last 500 civilians reached the mountain bunkers through the evacuation tunnels. The mission was complete. Every family in the colony was safe. Collins received the confirmation message and fell to his knees with relief. His soldiers gathered around him, and some of them wept openly. They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had saved everyone. Will finally ordered a direct assault on his fleet. Her loyal ships opened fire on his. The space above 4 became a battlefield where fought, lost 12 ships in the first exchange. But he held his line. He held it because humans were watching. He held it because honor demanded nothing less. Torres tended to the last of the wounded while explosions lit the sky above. A prisoner asked her what was happening. She told him that his general was protecting humans from his own people. The alien looked at her with confusion that slowly became understanding. He said something in his own language that the translator rendered as respect. When space ended when word arrived from the broadcast had reached the civilian population. Millions of them were demanding to know why their military had ordered chemical attacks on children. Political leaders were calling emergency sessions. The High Council had recalled Admiral to face questions about her conduct. The war was over before it had truly begun. Treated with her remaining loyal ships, she sent one final message promising that he would pay for his treason. He received her threat without concern. He had done what was right. Whatever came next he would face with a clear conscience. Received an invitation to meet with again the following morning. This time they met in the open under a clear sky. The general came alone. The captain came alone. They stood together and looked at the ruined colony that had cost so much blood on both sides. First, he said he had been a soldier for 40 years. He had won many victories and earned many honors, but he had never felt proud of his service until today. Today he had his own empire to protect innocent lives. Today he had learned that courage meant more than killing enemies. It meant standing for what was right even when standing alone. Thanked him for saving the colony. He said the humans would never forget what had done. He said there was hope now for something better between their species. Not just the end of one small war, but the beginning of real understanding. The council sent new orders 3 days later. All military operations against human territories were suspended pending a full review. A delegation would be sent to open diplomatic talks. The Empire wanted to learn more about these strange beings who fought with honor and showed mercy to enemies. Was named as the lead diplomat for the side. Park and his surviving soldiers stood at attention when the news arrived. 12 of his original squad had made it through the siege. They had lost friends and brothers and sisters in arms, but they had also gained something precious. They had proven that human values could change the galaxy. They had shown that kindness was not weakness. They had demonstrated that the rules of war mattered even when facing extinction. Torres held a small ceremony for the fallen before the evacuation ships arrived. She read the names of every soldier who had died defending the colony. She spoke of their courage and their sacrifice, and she made a promise that their deaths would mean something. The galaxy would remember what happened on 4. The galaxy would remember how humans fought and how humans died and how humans lived their values until the very end. The ceremony as an observer. He stood apart from the humans, but he listened to every word. When Maya finished speaking, he approached her and offered something in his hand. It was a medal of honor. He said it belonged to the human soldiers who had earned his respect. Maya accepted it with tears in her eyes. Then shook hands as the evacuation ship prepared to depart. The captain asked the general what he had learned from the siege, thought for a long moment before answering. He said he had learned that the strongest army was one that knew when not to fight. He said he had learned that mercy was not the opposite of strength. It was the expression of it. And he said he had learned that humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because they could kill without mercy. Because they had shown mercy without weakness. The ship lifted off from 4 carrying the last of the human defenders. Collins watched the ruined colony shrink below him and felt peace settling into his heart. They had lost so much in this siege, but they had gained something greater. They had proven that humanity's greatest weapons were not guns or ships or bombs. They were honor and compassion and the courage to do what was right. To his flagship and began preparing his diplomatic mission. He would spend the next year traveling between human and worlds. He would tell the story of 4 to anyone who would listen. He would explain how 200 human soldiers had changed his understanding of war and honor and what it meant to be a warrior. Galaxy would never see humans the same way again, and that was the greatest victory of all.